Today, our nation commemorates Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who stood on the steps of Lincoln Memorial and spoke for the dreams of equality and justice for all. Like some of us in this room, I didn't know who Martin Luther King was. I grew up in the 60s. I saw him on TV. My family was migrant, so there was no African Americans in our community. So when Martin Luther King was on TV, I asked my dad, what's he doing? What's civil rights? And he said, well, in the South, or across the country, African Americans are treated badly. And I said, oh, okay. So I knew something. I was just a kid at the time, so I didn't really know. As time went on, one of the things that Martin Luther King said was that there's prejudice out there. And I'll tell you some prejudice that was not only happening to African Americans, but also to the Hispanic communities. In my community, I'll give you a story. Sunnyside, Washington. My brother was going to be born. My mom went into labor. They lived in a little country home outside of Sunnyside. And my dad didn't have a car, so he went to the farmhouse, ran about a mile away, went to use a phone to get a car so my mom could go to the hospital. Well, gets to the farmhouse, knocks on the door, a farmer comes out and says, my dad says, can I use your phone? And the farmer said, no. And my dad's going, my wife's in labor, I need to call for help. And he said, no. And the only reason I'm telling you no is because you're Mexican. That's prejudice. This is all before Martin Luther King. When I got to my hometown, get there, the way it was set up was just like a West Side Story. If you remember that movie back in the day, you had the railroad tracks. You had the white people on one side, and on the north side, on C Street, that's where the Hispanics or the Mexicans lived. We called it tortilla flats. That's how we grew up. When I got to high school, so as a freshman, my sophomore brother, took me in and he said, Alex, here's the rules. You go down that hall because that's a Mexican hall. You go down this hall, that's a white hall. And you don't want to go down that hall because the Mexicans will beat you up. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, they'll beat you up because you're trying to be like a white guy. And I said, well, how do I get to class? How do I move around? He goes, well, you just have to maneuver and just not hang around with white people or else you're going to get beat up. That is prejudiced. And that's what it's like. That's the real life of it. When Martin Luther King came, all of a sudden things changed. I wasn't being called those vile names I've been called my whole life. Those names that get called all the time. All of a sudden I was called just a Mexican, not anything behind it. All those names that we all know what those names are. I was called a Mexican. They still didn't like me too much, but at least it was better. I could go down that hall. After a little while, I could go down that hall, go to my class, mingle with white people because they let us. And we kind of fought the fight. And it wasn't because of me, it was because of Martin Luther King and some of the things he did that make people change their mannerisms, their thinking about what it is to be a person, not the color of your skin, but a person. And so as time went on, I living in Quincy, all of a sudden I'm a school board member. All of a sudden I get voted in twice. All of a sudden I'm a state representative, and I'm here at this floor with these wonderful folks that are here trying to change this world for the better. And that was all due to Martin Luther King and his dream to make everybody the same. I can go back home, I can mingle with white people, African Americans, with Hispanics, and we're all the same. We have a long ways to go, but he's the one that got started, and let's just keep going forward. Thank you.